It's time to let your sports opinions fly for the main event. A 7-team elimination match to decide the District 4 3A Championship. Presented to you live by PilotPointBearcats.com. This 10-week match has been sanctioned by the University of Interscholastic League. Our celebrity referee for the District 4 3A show is none other than the daytime psychology professor, Texas high school football storyteller, North Texas insider, and DFW Inside High School Sports, the most feared member of the Texas high school mafia, the one, the only, small-town Dixie, the professor,
Showtime! From the home offices in Parker, Texas, just outside the shadow of South Fork Ranch, this is the Professor, Matt Diggs with the District 4 3A Report. And this week, a well-meaning friend was talking to me and said something to the effect of, Diggs, you overreact about everything. The dump, and if you're unfamiliar with the dump is my look at 6A, 5A, and small schools in the DFW area on Friday night based on just very limited information. I get a score, some stats, and I try to analyze what it means and where the teams are going from A to Z, from the good teams to the bad teams. So I think they are right. I think I am in the mode of overreacting in many ways, and I'm okay with that because I think high school football is the kind of sport where you want to overreact, and I understand that coaches know way more than I do. I almost wish one time we could get a coach, and I've been very close a couple of times. Randy Jackson has been very kind, and I think he was willing to do it before he got hired as a full-time football coach over in Greenville after he was in Berlin for a year playing European football as an offensive coordinator, to really just share what is going on in the brain of a coach.
All right, so dog, there's some good stuff and some bad stuff here. All right, here we go.
Because you might have a game, and I'm saying this team lost to this team, and this team is disappointing, and they have no chance. And the coach may be thinking, yeah, that might be nice, Diggs, but you don't realize that our two best defensive tackles had a stomach bug, and they weren't playing in the game, and a couple other people were under the weather from that same stomach bug, and they could play. And yeah, we lost the game, but there were some extenuating circumstances. So obviously when you cover as many teams as I do, I can't get that kind of detailed information, and some coaches won't share that information, even if they do, because it sounds like an external excuse. And I know a lot of coaches are very internally motivated, next man up. You got to play with the team on the field. And overreaction is just what I think I do, and I'm looking at the District 4 3A report. Thank you for tuning in. Make sure you like, subscribe, comment, and any variant of that. We're still at the 1, so just make sure you do one of those things. And if you've done your 1, good job. I'm not going to force you to think about a second one quite yet. We'll shape that and bring it later on in the season, a little successive approximation in the psychology world. And I think maybe I'm going to be overreacting a little bit about Whitesboro this week, because Whitesboro got beat by Brock this past week. They lost to Bells this past. 5-letter words that begin with B get me sometime. They lost to Bells 38-27. And even though you look at this margin and you look at it as an 11-point margin, another way to look at it was 5 touchdowns to 4 touchdowns, because Bells goes for 2 points, and they got the 2-point conversion of 4 of their 5 and missed it on 1. And then Whitesboro missed an extra point or missed a 2-point conversion somewhere along the line. I don't have that kind of detailed play-by-play on this. So the game was a little bit closer than the score might indicate. You might think 11-2 scores, and there is a significant difference, I think, between two scores and one score. But going into the District 4 3A report last week, we really thought that this was a defining game for Whitesboro to see where they're at, and probably a defining game for Bells because both teams were in the same boat, trying to figure out who was going to be stepping up, who was going to be the leader, who's going to make a lot of that offense that they had lost, who's going to make up a lot of that offense that they had lost. And Bells with a very dominant 38-27 performance in winning that game. And when I say dominant, 380 rushing yards. To me, that's pretty dominant. When you are basically have the ball run down your throat at that level, that's concerning. And you know what Bells is going to do. It's no secret. This is what they do. These are all new kids who are running the ball. And Whitesboro did not have the defensive depth to compete with a smaller 3A Division II Bells school that they have beaten the last couple of years. And yes, those games have always been close. They've always been competitive. This Whitesboro Bells rivalry has been one of the best things I've enjoyed in the District 4 3A report. But for me, I think it highlights that Whitesboro, specifically defensively, because offensively, they did a lot of good things. Clay Hermes is really seeing the field very well in the highlights I was seeing. He's making smart plays. He's making Mac Harper, he's a bit of a gunslinger, and that's good for Whitesboro, and you like that, but it did lead to some mistakes. It led to turnovers. Clay makes the smart read, makes the smart play, and they offensively, they vibe. Max Parker ran the ball for 3 touchdowns. Clay with a very high percentage, 18 of 31, 184 yards, limiting the mistakes. Carter Sluter, Brett Donaldson, Max Parker, all with good receiving games. So offensively, I'm not really worried about them. They're scoring 27. They scored 49 the week before against Krum. Offense is fine. The defense is where I'm now seeing that deficiency in that lack of depth, because last year against Brock, it really took Whitesboro's defense to step up to make those games competitive. And I think even from 2021 to 2022, that was the biggest difference in Whitesboro. And now that I see Bells fairly easily putting up 38 points and 380 total yards, they didn't even complete a pass. They only attempted one, according to Max Preps. That to me shows that shift with Whitesboro being a bit down from last year, and maybe that is an overreaction. Maybe this week they upset Pottsboro and get right back in there, because Pottsboro has not really been playing at a high level at times this season as well. Both games at Pottsboro, I have Pottsboro as a potentially state-ranked team, and both games were competitive one-score games, head-scratchers that I thought a team like Pottsboro, who should be state-ranked, should be going out and winning these games a bit more by a bit more. But they've won the games, and obviously that's important. It doesn't matter if you win every game by 1 point; they're going to call you state champion at the end of the day. But in what I've seen so far in a lot of blowouts this year, when you're just that much better than a team, you're gonna get up big on them. And at least so far, Pottsboro has not shown to be significantly better than the teams they're playing. And the teams they're playing are not necessarily state contenders, very much unlike Brock is doing. Brock's playing some of the best in the state in 4A Division II and then 3A Division II, which will obviously be the big game of the week, and we'll talk about that in more detail. But my overreaction is I'm incredibly worried about Whitesboro. But, there's two tiers to that worry. I think Whitesboro is not anywhere near missing the playoffs. Whitesboro still looks like a solid number 3 in this district. And when you look at the surrounding teams, Bushland lost to Canadian pretty convincingly last week. Jim Ned looks like they're a little bit back up. Jim Ned might get a nod over Whitesboro right now in the region. Paradise and Brock obviously are being state-ranked elite teams. So Paradise and Brock. So if you're ranking the region right now, Whitesboro would probably be 4th. And with that, that's a 3rd-round playoff run. Most coaches are not going to complain and be sad about a 3-round playoff run. You look at Whitesboro likely playing, even if they're third, they would play the second place team in District 3, 3A, and right now that looks like it might be a Vernon squad, and then they would go over and play District 1, District 2, one of the teams out of there. And other than Bushland, none of those teams look like world beaters. And then in that third round, you're looking at potentially a Paradise rematch, and that's where I think that the season may end. So if you look at the big picture, and you take all the feelings and you strip away the emotion from it, and you say, okay, Whitesboro goes 4 rounds deep 2 straight years. They go 3 rounds deep the third year. Is that a failure? No, it's not a failure at all. But in growth ideology, are you getting better every year? This could be a step back, and I'm sad to see that. And I was hoping that Whitesboro would be getting to the point where no matter who they had on the field, they'd be getting better every single year. Kind of that Highland Park mentality, where any given year they might end up being a state champion with people you've never heard of. In the 3, like Gunter does that, and Brock to a certain extent does that, although I think Brock has a lot more talent. Gunter has a couple of players, but it's basically a bunch of no-name returning sophomores who are very talented, but not D1 kids, just kids who have bought in and played hard. I saw Gunter against Walnut Grove this past weekend, but came away immeasurably impressed at Gunter, and we'll talk more about that experience next week for our game of the week with Gunter and Brock. But I'm a little sad to see Whitesboro appears to have taken that step back. Now again, if I was talking to Fagan, because Fagan and I don't break down the games, and I kind of keep this independently of the coaches for that reason. Maybe I'm going to hear, a COVID bug is going around on the defensive side, or any number of things that might give reason to why that might have happened. But from my perspective, just looking at the stats, watching the huddle videos and checking out the highlights, it just looks like Whitesboro defensively is nowhere near, by a magnitude of a couple of steps down from last year, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Again, the offensive side of the ball seems to be at, a little bit different, but at that same level as last year. Defense, very concerned about it. So we'll see this week when they take on Pottsboro, if that continues on, and they start out 1-2 before going into that last non-district game, or will they bounce back and maybe get an upset win that people were not expecting? A game that I thought Brock had a chance to win, and they did. They defeated Wichita Falls Hirschi 28-14, and finally they win the turnover battle. We keep talking about it, and at some point it had to go their way. At some point, they seem to have had everything go wrong that could on the turnover side, but this time they won the turnover battle 3-1 because the yardage. You can make a very argument that Hirschi played a little bit better than Brock. Very very minimal. Hirschi had 227 yards. Brock had 212 yards, but Brock had a pick 6 in that game. They had 2 fumbles where they were allowed to start in Hirschi's red zone or right outside their red zone. One of them they converted for a touchdown. The other one, since I watched the full game, they didn't do. They either fumbled it back or ended up getting no points out of that. Tyler Butler and Jackson Hart had a couple of good touchdown receptions for Brock, and they beat a very good 4A Division II Hirschi team. But when I look at the stats and break it down again, I'm still getting nervous. This is beginning to look more like last year's Brock team than this brand new Brock team that I was expecting this year. Brody Woods, 9 of 13 for 65 yards. That to me is not the dynamic offensive output I was seeing in the scrimmages. Now again, that's a function of who they're playing. Wichita Falls Hirschi, Texarkana Pleasant Grove, this upcoming week against Wimberly. These are some of the elite defenses in 4A Division II. Obviously, you're going to have a good size. But Brock was supposed to have figured that out and worked through it. Running the ball, 18 of 85, 18 carries for 85 yards. For Woods, 17 carries for 57 yards. For Brett Tedder, we're talking about 3-4 yard smash mouth kind of football plays, and I'm not seeing that big offensive. Who's your go-to? Who is that person who's going to be able to make a difference and turn a 10-yard play into a 70-yard play? And so far through 2 weeks, yes, it's against good teams. Nobody from Brock has made one of those plays. This might be where they're missing Reed Watkins, who transferred over to All Saints, because they're making effective plays, but they're not making explosive plays. And at some point, Brock is going to need somebody to make explosive plays, and not when they're playing the bottom four of the district. They're going to need somebody to make explosive plays in big games. And right now, through 2 weeks, they're 1-1, so that is an uptrend from last year. Nobody is making the big plays yet. Carson Finney held to only 1 catch and 7 yards. Tyler Butler, 4 catches for 40 yards. Jackson Hart with a nice 1 yard. A good drag route near the end zone. I got to watch that play on the huddle. Well called. But again, that was a 3rd and 1 at the goal line. And it showed they were having a hard time pounding it in from the 1 yard line as a big play, the big play being 15 yards at that point, set them up at 1st and goal with a 1, and now we're 3rd and goal with the 1 because they couldn't knock it in. And then Jackson Hart was able to run that good drag route along the back end of the end zone and catch that touchdown. What is Brock going to do? Who's going to be that explosive powerhouse for them to break out of this funk of 4 yards, 5 yards, 6 yards, because that is where you get bogged down. That's where a false start completely ruins a drive. That's where a holding play completely eliminates your chances, because you don't have anybody who can get you that 12 to 15 yards consistently when you need it. So I'm a little bit worried about Brock, but I'm also heartened that they were getting the turnover situation dealt with, and they got a win. Now they're going to play Wimberly this week, and we'll find out a little bit more when we talk about the games coming up. Can they get a second win? Muenster versus Paradise. Muenster had no answer for Paradise. Austin Iglesias with just another ridiculous stat line. 172 yards rushing, 4 touchdowns, 215 yards passing, and a 5th touchdown through the air. He did throw a couple of interceptions, but that defense for Paradise, it's kind of the antithesis of Whitesboro. You can see Paradise getting better defensively, whereas Whitesboro did not get better defensively. And I think a Whitesboro fan who hears that might be saying, well, Muenster and some Cypress Christian school is not necessarily bells and Pottsboro and Krum. And I get that, but it still shows that Paradise, Muenster is expected to be better. So, if Muenster ends up being 1-9 and can only beat Lindsay or something, I can look back at that and go, okay, that was probably true. And this is definitely not a defining game for Paradise. And Paradise, because they play kind of down schedule, although Godley will give them a little bit of probably their toughest battle this week. They're not going to really even have that defining game until Brock. So I get a lot of people's hesitancy to crown Paradise. Last year we babbled and talked about on the District 4 3A report about the AP rankings, which Dave Campbell does, and Paradise and Whitesboro should have been legitimately state ranked. Now we've got Paradise state ranked, and they haven't even done anything. It's just kind of that reputation and expecting them, and at least they're winning the games they're supposed to win in formats that are impressive. So that's all you can do at the end of the day. I wish Paradise would have given us at least one non-district game where we could look at it and go, okay, this is a team that has gotten better because they beat somebody. And Godley might give us a little bit of insight. Godley has had a couple of tough break card losses the last couple of weeks, but I still think Paradise is probably going to roll to district until it's Whitesboro and until it's Brock, who will give them a bit of a challenge. Boyd versus Jacksboro, we had a bit of a bounce back this past week. Boyd losing 48-45, but in multiple computer polls, Jacksboro was a 4-5 score favorite. So I consider Boyd having bounced back even in their loss. We talk about that overreaction and Blue Ridge losing to them the way they did with all the turnovers they had. Obviously, you got to clean up the turnovers at some level, but Boyd, with that bounce back, and kind of showed us a little bit more of what they were capable of. Braden McIntyre went 19 of 25 for 387 yards, 4 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Still not really having that dominant runner, although they did have 150 yards rushing overall. Luke Brown had 18 carries for 68 yards to Pace and Boyd in that game. But Jacksboro put up nearly 600 yards against Boyd, got up big in the second half, and Boyd with a couple of late touchdowns to make the margin a little bit better, but 48-45 ultimately is where that game landed up. Ponder versus Dunbar, that was a very competitive game. That our introduction to Ponder, Dunbar winning the game 30-29. And watching the highlights, I was very impressed by the sophomore from Ponder named Tyson Price. He looks like a gunslinger. It's hard to tell statistics or body statistics from a video, but he looked 6'1", 6'2", a very tall kid, very athletic, very smart. 14 of 19 for 242 yards and 4 touchdowns. Case Peacock, we talked about him, and he's going to probably set all kinds of District 4 3A records. We're going to go ahead and pencil him in potentially as offensive MVP or first team all District 4 3A report. 7 receptions for 122 yards, 3 touchdowns. So Ponder has figured out the offensive side of the ball, and they're showing that continuation from last year. But defensively, they struggled with stopping the run as well. Ben Smith for Fort Worth Dunbar, 22 carries for 164 yards. So they were just gashing them that 8 to 10 yards whenever they wanted to. Brighton Woodard, 14 for 23, 162 yards, averaging 11 to 12 yards a pass for Dunbar. So Ponder's defense, even though we're not seeing these 70 to 60 shootouts, is still a little bit undersized on the lines and having a hard time with the linebackers to fill those gaps. The secondary is still making a lot of tackles. Now, they were able to slow it down and limit plays. Last year, with the timing, I think you saw 70, 80 plays at times, and Dunbar only had 54. So when you cut that down, you bring the score down and you give yourself a chance. Ponder had a chance to win this game, but lost 30-29 with a fourth quarter field goal for them to take the first loss of the year. Looking at Pilot Point and Plainview just had their way with Pilot Point, 48-7, 425 yards for Plainview. Aiden Hamblin was a bright spot for Pilot Point, 12 of 20, 82 yards, also running the ball 12 times for 74 yards. We keep talking about him, Rowdy Robinson, a basketball player who is first year playing football, 6 receptions for 50 yards. He looks very special, but there's nobody else around him to, get him out in space and spring him. So if Pilot Point can figure out how to use him as a weapon, I think they have an opportunity to score some points at times, but their defense is obviously the big factor, giving up 48 points against Plainview, and I don't see any relief coming up for Pilot Point as they continue to struggle. And then finally, Peaster against River Oaks Castleberry this past week. Peaster, on one hand, Peaster had a very nice win, and you look at what Peaster did, and you're like, okay, I see a little bit here. I see a little bit of big play offense, and I see the ability to score the ball. Obviously, winning 38-7, but another thing I'm worried about when I really kind of break down the numbers, they had 304 total yards in the game, but they had most of their yardage in big plays. They had a 54-yard run, they had a 72-yard pass, they had a pick 6 for a touchdown. They only went 1 of 7 on third downs against a Castleberry defense that is not known for being a shutdown defense. And if you take out their 3 or 4 biggest plays, they averaged like less than 2 yards a play for the rest of their snaps in the game. And, they only had 32 offensive snaps. whereas Castleberry had 55, so they had a hard time slowing them down and getting them off the field at times, either through penalties or through Castleberry's ability to convert on third down. So on one hand, they make the most of those plays, having 4 or 5 big plays, but the other 20 to 25 plays that Peaster had, that doesn't show me that kind of offensive consistency I'm looking for out of Peaster. So Ty Steedley, 6 of 14 for 181 yards and 3 touchdowns. Also 2 carries for a yard. Lave Bringman, 10 carries for 93 yards. He had a 54-yard run as part of that. So when you take that 54 yards out of there, again, down to 3 or 4 yards a run. Jaden Kuiper, 6 carries for 29 yards. Rhett Steen, the stud on the receiving side of the ledger, 4 receptions for 159 yards, including a 72-yard touchdown and 2 touchdowns. And Kenton Morrow had a reception for 14 yards and a touchdown as well for Peaster. So what I'm going to be looking for in Peaster is, can they sustain drives? Can they get, and this is what they couldn't do against Toller. They could move between the 20s at times, but they couldn't finish and they couldn't have extended long drives. And even in a big 38-7 win, you could still see that as a deficiency against River Oaks Castleberry. So this week we have a lot to break down and kind of consider what the games mean and where each team will be going. Paradise is going to take on Godley. I think this is going to be a bigger test than some think, because you might see Godley at 0-2, but they are 4A Division II. I had them area ranked coming into the year. Now, 4A Division II is pretty abysmal in the DFW area. The Power Center is obviously in East Texas and even in West Texas, because I look at Region 1. You have Glen Rose, who made it to the state semifinals, should have beat Carthage last year, but were unable to finish in the Star. And obviously, Glen Rose is not what they were at all. They've had a small win and then a blowout loss to Grandview, and then Grandview was blown out by Malakoff. So Malakoff is showing in Region 2 that they are the team to beat, and whoever Paradise, Whitesboro, or Brock can get out of Region 1, or Bushland, or Jim Ned, if you are a West Texas fan, it looks like Malakoff is still the team to beat out of Region 2. Very dominant performances so far. That back to the powerhouses. You look at Godley, and you just think to yourself, they can compete in this district for a Division II. Glen Rose is down. Benbrook is kind of a surprise team, but Godley is right there and able to potentially win this district. So Paradise has an opportunity to potentially beat a district champion in 4A Division II, and a team, if you look at regionally, other than Graham, other than maybe Seminole, other than maybe Monahans, they are right there, and they played a shootout last year. I can't remember which of the West Texas teams they lost to, but they had a shootout and they lost late in that game. So Godley is a team that has the potential to have a lot of firepower and could give Paradise fits. They lost to West 17-7. West is a team that we've had ranked in the 3A Division 1 area rankings, and they lost to Quinlan Ford 44-39. So last year, Godley lost 51-15, so I think they're going to be looking to avenge things, and we will find out if they can. I think that Paradise will have an opportunity to make a statement at Godley's expense. But you look at the statistics so far for Godley, and they got a couple of special players that you're going to have to watch out for if you're Paradise. They've got Landon Thigpen, who has run the ball 39 times for 348 yards. He's broken out a 97-yard touchdown run, so he can score anywhere on the field. He's scored a couple of touchdowns. And then their quarterback, Wyatt Burke, 16 of 35 this season for 235 yards. Kind of prone to an interception, and Paradise defensively might be able to take care of that and take advantage of that. There's a couple of ways that this could go. If Paradise wins a 42-14 game, that's what I would kind of consider my benchmark of them being much closer to Brock than we might have thought. If this game is, kind of gets closer to 48-20, 42-28, something like that, then that's kind of what most people would have expected out of Paradise. Beating a 4A Division II school by a couple of touchdowns, depending how that, if they score 3 touchdowns in the fourth quarter and it was 42-7, they put the backups in, that's one thing. But if it's a back and forth game, 21-14 at the halftime, 35-21 going into the fourth quarter, 35-28 at one point before Paradise puts it away. That is kind of what I expect to happen in this game by looking at the statistics and what they have coming back. Now, if they completely get blowout Godley, like a 42-0, 49-0, 35-0 like they beat Muenster, I think that's going to put Brock on notice and justify a very high ranking. So I'm looking for style points here. Will Paradise be able to step up, and what level are they at? Are we kind of where we thought they were? Are they even better than we thought they were? Or are they closing in on the elite status? And this is a good opportunity because we're not going to have much opportunities to assess that until they play Brock and Whitesboro in the regular district season play coming up in a couple of weeks. Wimberly is going to be taking on Brock. Wimberly is 2-0. They defeated Canyon Lake 60-6 and San Antonio Piper 44-6. Obviously, a very strong defense, and Brock keeps running into these extremely strong defenses. I think Gunter is going to be the first defense that might give them a little bit of relief, and finally maybe we can see this high-flying offense that we expected to see, but Wimberly defensively looks very sound. Last year, Brock did have some offensive success, but Wimberly did win this game 32-23. I think Wimberly is going to be a favorite again this year. Their quarterback, Cody Stover, 29 for 42, 340 yards, 6 touchdowns, very efficient. And their top running back right now is Chase Carson, 31 carries for 200 yards and a touchdown. Cody Stover has also run the ball 5 times, or has run for 5 touchdowns. So he is their big touchdown maker for Wimberly. Can Brock match that? Because Brock hasn't had that ability to have the offensive output this year. I think Wimberly will win this game, but I think it's going to be one of those slugfests again, maybe a 14-7 or 14-0 kind of game where Wimberly is able to pull it out, depending on Brock's propensity to have the turnovers or not have the turnovers, as they finally did this past week against Wichita Falls Hirschi. Pottsboro 2-0. They've defeated Van Alstyne 28-22, and they defeated Kalispberg 34-28. As I mentioned earlier, in breaking down Whitesboro, Pottsboro has not impressed me at all in the non-district slate so far. Last year, Whitesboro got a 35-27 win over Pottsboro, but one thing that has been incredibly impressive with Pottsboro has been their running back, Major McBride, who has rushed 452 yards in just the 2 games, averaging over 200 yards. And now I'm looking at Bell's pretty much able to do whatever they wanted against Whitesboro and Major McBride. How can you say he's not going to have a 200-yard game? Maybe he even has a 300-yard game against Whitesboro. That's the kind of fear factor I currently have after seeing what Bells was able to do. I do not have high hopes for Whitesboro, although it could be a huge redeeming victory. I think Pottsboro finally wins a game by more than a touchdown, maybe even 2 touchdowns. But so far, 2 games, 2 one-score games. So if Whitesboro can keep this to a one-score game or win it, I think they will have overachieved my expectations for them and show that improvement that I'm hoping for week in and week out from Whitesboro. If they lose this game by 2 scores or more, again, I don't think it's going to change anything regionally as far as them being 3rd in this district or being 4th or 5th in this region. But I think it just, again, highlights that they are down from last year. I'm not worried about the offense. I think the offense is going to be fine, but can the defense step up? This is a challenge to the Whitesboro defense. Can you step up against one of the areas, if not the state's top rushers, who they're not going to hide it? You know what he's going to do. Can you stop it? And we're going to find out that about Whitesboro this week. Jacksboro 2-0. They defeated Breckenridge for 37-35. They defeated Boyd 48-45, and we're going to get to see them play another District 4 3A school in Peaster. And I think that Jacksboro should beat Peaster by a little bit more than 3. So, this is right now my 4th and 5th place teams are Peaster and Boyd. So Peaster beating Boyd would be a statement that Peaster definitely deserves that 4th spot. If they get blown out, then I think the edge might go to Boyd. But again, Boyd had some window dressing in the 4th quarter to make that game a little bit closer. I think Boyd's offense is a little bit better than Peaster's offense, but I think Boyd's defense is not nearly what Peaster's defense is. So what will Peaster do against Jacksboro, who's averaged almost 600 yards a game? That to me is not a good matchup for Peaster at all. I think Jacksboro will win a game between 14 and 21, but I don't necessarily think that that's going to make Peaster drop in my rankings of them. I think they're still going to be right there with Boyd right now for the 4th or 5th spot. We will see Krum again. We're seeing a lot of our same schools as the District 4 3A report kind of recycles our teams. We play each other. Krum did not beat. They lost to Whitesboro 49-28, and they defeated Burke Burnett 19-16. Last year, they played Ponder, and they lost 56-51. So Krum is looking to avenge last year's loss. I think they will avenge this loss. I think offensively they are much more refined than they were in last year, which again is a compliment to Whitesboro for being able to beat Krum pretty convincingly. But again, offense, they're fine. That's the 49. Can you keep Krum to 28? Because Whitesboro, can't always outshoot everybody. Ty Tabor, 428 yards over the 2 games, 32 of 52, 4 touchdowns, only 1 interception. The rushing game is not very strong for Krum. It's Hayden Jones, 23 carries for 121 yards, although you'll see Tabor, Mateo Gonzalez, and Noah Williams also run the rock for Krum. I think that we are going to see Krum with a 3-score victory over Ponder. I think Ponder is getting better, but I don't think that they're going to be at that level. And can they score against Krum at the level that Whitesboro did? I don't. Last year you could say so, but that's a kind of a function of their offense. This year I think they've dialed it back a bit, and I think we'll see Krum with a pretty handy victory over Ponder. Forest Country Day, a private school, they lost to St. Mark's 49-27. They defeated St. Andrews 49-2. Last year they lost to Boyd 32-24. This year they are a pretty big favorite. Reading the article in the Wise County Messenger, their coach was really fixated on the quarterback over at Forest Country Day. And Forest Country Day last week had 49 points in about the first 18 minutes, and then they called off the Dogs. And that quarterback he was worried about, Andrew Edwards, had a huge game. So can Boyd, who has not stopped anybody this year, they haven't stopped Blue Ridge, or they haven't stopped Jacksboro, can they stop Fort Worth Country Day? I don't think so. I think we're going to see another shootout. But I think Country Day will win a 49-35 kind of a game against Boyd and send Boyd to 0-3. But again, I don't think that tells me too much about that 4th playoff spot quite yet. Just we know Boyd's deficiencies. Right now they have no running game, and the defense is a little bit lacking. But Braden McIntyre, one of the top quarterbacks in the area, able to sling it around and keep Boyd in a lot of games, which makes them dangerous, because when you have a player like that, if he plays a perfect game without the interceptions, they can compete with a lot of teams that you might not otherwise think they could. And finally, Pilot Point versus Farmersville. This game was a game that we thought Pilot Point would win last year, and they lost 21-18. Farmersville looks much better this year. They beat Eustis 53-0. They beat Molina 49-14, and Pilot Point isn't quite what they were last year. So you look at Farmersville, and when you got a Craddock on the team, and they got Geraldine Craddock, that's the Craddock family is just one of those families in Farmersville that they just find a way to help Farmersville be better than they have been in the past. And This one is Geraldine Craddock. He's had 14 carries for 137 yards and 2 touchdowns. Whenever he touched the ball, there's a big plays happening. Their quarterback is Brady Gray, 16 of 27 for 245 yards and 2 touchdowns. Again, there's not a lot of fumbles. There's not a lot of interceptions. They are playing very clean football, and they run the rock. They've run the ball 70 times this year for 704 yards. And we talk about Craddock, but their leading rusher is Gerardo Reyes, who's carried the ball 32 times for 316 yards and 4 touchdowns. So multiple kids who can run the ball 8 to 10 yards. That does not serve well, kind of like with Plainview for Pilot Point chances. I think a very similar 48-7, 49-7 score, which is in line with what Farmersville has done, 53-0 and 49-14. So Pilot Point has an opportunity to make a statement if they can make that game a little bit closer to get back up in that conversation with Peaster and Boyd right now, who I think are going to be battling for that 4th playoff spot. Next week, the big story will be Gunter versus Brock. That's going to be a game we are going to be talking about, and I will be there at. So kind of a District 4 3A field trip up 289 to Gunter to check out Brock. And then after that, we are going to get started for District. So we have 2 more data points before District starts. Things are kind of settling in for me. Like I said, I see Brock 1, I see Paradise 2, I see Whitesboro 3, and then I see a pretty big drop-off of 4 and 5 and 6 and 7, all very close. I think 4 and 5 have differentiated themselves a little bit from 6 and 7, Pilot Point at 6, or Ponder at 6, and the other team at 7. So whoever comes out of that game, will be the 6th place team as of now. But I always reserve the ability to overreact, and I always reserve the ability to change my mind. And to our friends at Pilot Point, why don't you change my mind with a wonderful outro, as you always do, with all of the lines, and maybe you can get me a little bit about doubt, about being a doubter and an overreactor, and Whitesboro can sit there and wag their finger at me and say, Diggs, you're wrong, and we're going to prove it this week. And again, I've been known to overreact. So for our friends at Pilot Point Studios, again, like, subscribe, comment. Just give us one right now from the shadows of South Fork Ranch in Parker, Texas. I am the Professor Matt Diggs, thanking you for tuning in to another District 4 3A report. See you down the road.
Right here is symbolic of what it's all about. This is the world's heavyweight title. And when I say this, I mean it in all sincerity. The world's heavyweight title, held by Harley Race, not once but twice. Over half of my life devoted to what I do better than any other human being in wrestling. I am not going to allow any human being to insult me or this. And when I say that, I mean it in dead sincerity. When I walk in that ring, I'm walking in there as world's heavyweight champion. I'm walking in there to defend what I hold probably more close than any other man has ever held. This is my life. You've heard your Ric Flairs talk about being cock of the walk. You've heard your Thunderbolt Pattersons. You've heard them all, Ole Anderson. They all talk about being the man. Flair parades around saying that he is the ultimate man. Well, buddy, this is symbolic of being everything that any human being ever wanted to be. That man is Harley Race. And for one of those individuals that I've mentioned, or the various others, to beat me, then let them walk around and claim to be what they are. You're looking at the world's heavyweight champion, the man that can truthfully say that he can beat any man in the world.